We didn't have church in the living room last Sunday, so I missed y'all. I saw several of you on Saturday. Last Saturday, we had our first ever Engage Day, and Engage Day was really cool. The name comes from part of our strategy at Neighborhood Church is to engage the people around us, to engage our community, to engage in meeting real, felt, tangible needs that people have. And so we had the opportunity to do that. 7 of us were there. Here we are. I might have earned the reputation as the guy who likes to kill things, because that's the stuff that that kills everything it touches, and I get a weird satisfaction from it. But it was awesome. We got to do fall cleanup, lots of yard work, pulling weeds. We winterized the sprinkler system at 5 different households, and it was really awesome, and people were super appreciative. And so I wanted to just read a couple of responses that we got, just to show you guys, this is awesome. This is what we did. This is how we made people feel. This first one I wish I had put on the screen because you have to see it to get the full effect, but I'll try to give it to you. So this is all caps. My yard looks amazing! Double exclamation point. Thank you so much. 3 exclamation points. Couple of emojis, including a heart. Now this is in all caps again. Like I'm shook. My bushes especially, I'm so grateful. Seriously, thank you. Here's another response we got. It says, thank you so much. I'm blown away by all that your group did. We don't have the tools to do much of that work on our own. It means a lot. So we really got to go out and serve people and meet some needs of people who couldn't meet those needs themselves. And that is showing the love of Jesus. And so what I loved most about Engage Day, as if I had planned it, actually this is not what I loved most, it just was really awesome the way it worked out. It kind of put a bow on our last series, Not For Me and Other Things Religion Made You Say, where on our last Sunday of that series, what we talked about was what is true religion, what's real religion, and it boiled down to 2 things, love God and love people. And so we got to do that. And we got to do that in a tangible way and just kind of say, okay, everything else that's been added to this word religion just gets stripped away. We're going to love God and love people. And we got to show people God's love. So it's awesome, too, that as if I could have planned this, it bridged us right into this series. Right? The last Sunday of Not For Me was love God, love people. That's our side of it, right? It also pushes us right into this one where we're talking about God's love for people. And so that's where we're headed in this next series, God's love for people. God makes people's needs his business. And we got to show that in a very tangible way last week. And so this is the first Sunday of our new series, The Strangest Sight. And it gets its name kind of in 2 different ways. The first is that it'll be right in the verses we read this morning. One of the main characters in this story sees something very strange. It's the strangest sight. And so it's Moses. And it's Moses writing about what he saw. It's not really an autobiography, though. We've got to recognize Moses isn't writing his story. What he's doing is writing more like the biography of people's unfaithfulness toward God and God's faithfulness in spite of that. God's faithfulness through it all toward the very same people who are unfaithful to him. So this is how a perfect God fights for imperfect people. Not just cares for, not just loves, not just knows, but fights for these people. It's about his consistent faithfulness through everything. And even more than that, too. Moses sees this strange sight, but more than that, it's a very strange idea in our culture that a perfect God would fight for imperfect people. Because lots of times we'll look at this and we get it backwards and say, well, wait, doesn't God say that I have to do this first? Doesn't God say I have to clean up my act or give this much money or whatever? Doesn't God expect this of me? And what I'm trying to do, we're trying to flip that script back to the way that it originally was. Not us offering something to God, but God coming in, making our mess his own. God offering himself to us into our situation. We're going to see that God cares, that God is involved in human events, in human history. God is involved in human affairs. He's with us, whether we're feeling beat down or maybe whether we're feeling pretty good about ourselves, because sometimes we're there too. And he invites us to be a part of what he's doing. He invites us to himself, and he'll stop at nothing to bring us in. This isn't the kind of invitation So Victoria and I got invited to a wedding last weekend in Dallas, where we used to live. And, the people inviting us were, they kind of said, we hope you can make it. We know it's really hard. No kids at the wedding. We know you got 2 kids and you don't live here. And so it's kind of this like, we're being polite. Hope you can make it. That's not how God invites. God stops at nothing to make his invitation a reality. It's as if, God invited us and he said, by the way, I'm going to send my private jet and my private limo with my driver, and we're going to make this happen. You're going to be here because I'm inviting you. That's the kind of invitation that God gives to us. And so we'll be in Exodus 3 over the next 5 weeks. Just Exodus 3, piece by piece. We'll take it in 5 chunks. And I'm really excited about this. And what I want you to remember through all of this series, the next 5 weeks, is that this is just the intro of the story. We could spend years and years and years going through the whole story, but this is the beginning of God bringing his people out of slavery, out of abuse and oppression, and that story is still happening today. So we can look at Exodus 3 as kind of the intro of Exodus, which is the intro of everything else. And the story's still happening today. God still does this today. And we'll be in Exodus 3, verses 1 to 4 today. So we'll have, I think, 22 verses by the end of 5 weeks in Exodus chapter 3 that we'll get through. And just the first 4 today. So I want to just read it to you first. I love to do this because the Word of God is powerful, and I think when we can kind of put it all in a little bit of a bigger view, not that we're going to read all of chapter 3 today, but we're going to read 1 through 4. And I just want you to be able to listen to it, to kind of piece together what's happening in the story. And then we'll take it in a couple chunks, and it'll be on the screen where you can actually follow along with me as I'm talking. But I just want you to listen first to God's Word. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. There's so much in this. I'm so excited for today. All right. I'm not even going to delay. We're just going to jump right back into verses 1 and 2 here on the screen. I'll read it again just so we can be ready to dig into it a bit more. It says, Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within the bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So if you've heard of Moses, you might be wondering, wait a second, I thought Moses was kind of the hero. We hear about Moses all the time as this heroic figure leading God's people, all these things. And so it's like, well, hold on a second. How did he get here? How is he alone in the wilderness with only sheep for friends? What happened to his triumph? What happened to his victory? Well, he's not really the hero yet. But in chapters 1 and 2 in Exodus, so this is the beginning of chapter 3, and I won't read 1 and 2 for the sake of time, but here's kind of the summary. Moses has had a little bit of a roller coaster life. At the time that Moses was born in Egypt, the Hebrew people were enslaved by Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and Moses is born at this time when the Pharaoh has basically an extermination order on Hebrew baby boys. He says they're becoming too many Hebrews. They're becoming too strong. What happens if they decide they don't want to be slaves anymore and they overthrow us? So Pharaoh says, any Hebrew boy that's born, you have to kill him. And there's a little bit of drama that happens. There are some Hebrew midwives who say that they're doing this, but they're not really doing it. They're protecting God's people. But suffice to say, Moses kind of escaped death, or his mom and sister saved him from death. His sister put him in a basket, put him in the Nile River. Pharaoh's daughter finds him. Her heart goes out to him, and she adopts him as her own. And so Moses grows up in the royal court of Egypt. And he enjoys luxury. He probably has the best meals, the best drinks, the best video games, all of that stuff, the best couches, a theater in his basement, all of that stuff. And then he sees another Egyptian official beating a Hebrew slave. He says, wait a second. Somewhere along the line, he figured out who he was. He says, wait a second, that's my people. You're doing that to you. So he gets angry and he kills this Egyptian official. And he tries to hide it, he tries to cover it up, but of course it's really hard to cover things up like that. And so word gets back to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh wants to kill Moses for doing what he did. And so Moses runs for his life. He hightails it out of there, and he heads to Midian. So that's how Moses, the hero, not yet hero, got to where he is now. And now, he's in Midian, he's gotten married to Jethro's daughter, of course. Jethro is his father-in-law. He's got a son at this point. He's been here for 40 years. Moses was approximately 80 years old at this time. So he had 40 years kind of luxury, and then 40 years of being alone out in the wilderness tending the sheep. He's safe and secure in Midian. He's far away from Egypt. He's never looking back, or so he thinks. Because then the angel of the Lord shows up. The angel of the Lord is a little bit of a complex topic, so I want to try to boil it down a bit here, but it's in the Old Testament. When the angel of the Lord shows up, it is very closely identified with God himself, with the presence of God. So people can't look at God in the face. And in fact, later in his life, Moses would ask, God, I want to see your glory, I want to look in your face. God says, you can't look at my face or you will die. So he says, here's what I'll do. I'll put you on a cliff, I'll cover your eyes as I pass by, and you can watch my back as I go away. So the angel of the Lord shows up in a flame of fire from within a bush. So this is God appearing to Moses, showing up to Moses in a way that Moses can handle, in a way that he can manage and not just die on the spot. He's showing up to talk to Moses. The fancy word for this, a personal, visible appearance of God to a person, the fancy word is theophany. You guys want to say theophany? Theophany. Are you learning a new word today? If you're learning a new word, break out your pen and piece of paper, write down theophany. Tear it off, fold it up, put it in your pocket. The next time you remember it's there, you feel something, you pull it out, I guarantee you will have your own theophany. Not a good joke? No, it was terrible, I know. So here's the other thing we want to recognize. The angel of the Lord appears in flames of fire. Fire in the book of Exodus is a sign of God's presence. Whenever we see fire in Exodus, God's leading the people out of Egypt. Later, spoiler alert, he leads them with a pillar of fire. Whenever we see fire in Exodus, God is there. We know he's present. So this is God coming to talk to Moses. And in the next verses, 3 and 4, this is where the conversation begins. And we're just picking up the beginning of the conversation today, and it'll continue kind of throughout the series. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. Makes sense, right? I mean, unless you're alone in the wilderness and there's a bush on fire, maybe you don't get close. But see why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. The sight of the burning bush is so strange that even this seasoned professional shepherd who's been doing this for 40 years is like, I've got to go check this out. I've got to go see what is going on here. But how many of us would just pass it by? How many of us would, either not even see it because we're distracted. We're paying attention to something else. I can't tell you how many times, Victoria and I'm driving somewhere, and Victoria's in the passenger seat, and she goes, did you see that? And I'm like, no, because I'm looking over here. And maybe I should be on the road, but it's crazy things. She'll be like, there was a dog doing ballet in a tutu on the street corner. Did you see that? And I'm like, no, I had no idea. I'm just distracted. I'm not paying attention. So sometimes we just pass it by because we don't even notice. Sometimes we see it and we're just like, that looks a little bit messy. I don't think I'm going to head that way, right? Or we're just too busy. We're just too busy, and we say, I got my own thing going on. I'm just going to pass that thing by. Maybe I should help that person, but I think I'm just going to keep going. I think so many of us want a burning bush moment like this. And I think they happen a lot more than we realize. We just miss most of them. Sometimes the burning bush is farther away. It's kind of off in the distance. And we see it, and we just make the decision, that's kind of out of my way. I think I'm going to go see what God's doing over there. We've got to get closer to it. We've got to go check it out. We've got to go see what God's doing. Get into His presence and figure out what's going on. I think sometimes we don't see the burning bush because we're right in the middle of it. Right? Like sometimes there are just things going on in our life. It's a rough time. We lose a loved one. Somebody's sick. We lose our job, and it all seems to happen right in the perfect storm all at once, right? And so sometimes we just don't see the burning bush because we're right in the middle of it. And I think sometimes we start to blame God for hurting us instead of saying, okay, God, you're right. What are you doing? What are you trying to teach me? Where are you trying to work in my heart? We want these burning bush moments, but we just miss them because we're not looking for them. We're distracted or we're too busy for them, and so we just keep on moving. Are we ready and are we open to being drawn away from the things that have captured our attention? From the things that we think are most important, that we think we want, that we think we need? We're ready and open to getting drawn away from those things so we can get drawn into the presence of God. In our everyday lives. Moses was out tending sheep in the wilderness. He wasn't like at the worship service. He wasn't at his wedding day. He wasn't, at the birth of his son anymore. He's not parting the Red Sea yet. He's just a shepherd out in the wilderness with a bunch of sheep around him. We've got to open ourselves up to God and to what He's doing in our everyday, mundane lives. Because here's the thing, God called to Moses. Catch that? He says, Moses. God called to Moses. We get too caught up sometimes in this idea that we call to God. And that's true. That's really important that we cry out to God. But we can't focus so much on I call out to God, at the expense of recognizing that God calls out to us too. God calls out to us. Have you ever prayed a prayer like this? Where you're like, God, I need this, and I want this, and I want you to do this. And by the way, thank you for that thing you did, but I want this, this, and this, and I need you to do this. Amen. Peace. You ever done that? I think if we think about this, that yes, we call out to God, but God calls out to us, that changes the way we pray. That makes us sit and listen for a little bit, doesn't it? We can't miss this, that God calls out to us. He draws in the unworthy to Himself. He draws in the messy to Himself. He draws in the ones with baggage to Himself, the ones who are hiding and just acting like everything is fine, holding it all in. He calls them to Himself, the ones who have learned to be comfortable, making it look like, yeah, it's all good. He calls them to Himself. So perfect God fights for imperfect people by making our mess His own. He makes our mess His own. He makes it His business. And He said, Moses, He knows your name. See, Moses had run for his life, gotten far away, wandering the wilderness. And God knows where he is. He knows where to find him. And He knows His name. No matter how much you try to run and hide from God, God knows you. He knows exactly where to find you. He's got your number. He knows your name. He knows your address. And He's not confused when you run away. He's like, oh, there we go. Still following. Still with Him. And what does Moses say? When God says, Moses, Moses, he says, here I am. How are we so afraid to say that to God? Right? Having problems today. I think we're afraid to say that to God. I think most of us, if God said our name, if he said, David, I think we'd be like, oh, hey, I know you saw that thing I did back there. I know you saw that thing I said to my spouse, the way I treated that person. But you got to know, it wasn't really my fault, because did you see what they did? Mm-hmm. Like, we jump to this justifying ourselves, right? And we forget it was God who called out to us. Who would say that? Who would just, God calls us and just say, here I am. Like, it is terrifying to think about what comes after the here I am. And just standing there silent in the presence of God. What happens next? What's he going to say? Where's this going to go? We probably all jump to justifying ourselves because we focus so much on our past. We focus so much on the messes we made. We focus on where we've been that our past disappointments, that we would actually disqualify ourselves from the presence of God. If we could, and say, if there's any inkling that God might be present in the room, like we're hightailing it out of there and we're running away. But I think if we just pause for a second, to think about who God really is, to think about the way he calls out to us, he enters into our situation, I think that we could also, just like Moses, say, okay, God, here I am. Here I am. So when we think about who God really is, we don't have to speculate. We don't have to wonder. Because he's shown us who he is through Jesus, God the Son. Who also, by the way, knows our past. Just like we do. He knows our disappointments. He knows the things that we've done. He knows the messes that we have made individually ourselves. He knows the messes that humanity as a whole together has made a really, really big mess, haven't we? I'm not making a political statement. You could make it one if you wanted to, but we've made a mess out of a lot of things. He knows all that. The thing that you did a few years ago, he knows that. That you ran away from the consequences of it because you didn't want to deal with it. He knows that too. And yet, Jesus himself left the throne of God to willingly enter our mess with us, to restore us. He makes our mess his business. He makes our mess his own. Perfect God fights for imperfect people by making our mess his own. So we can say confidently, okay, God, here I am. When he calls our name. The thing about this phrase, it's hard to get it across in an English translation of the Bible because it would take way too many words. But the Hebrew word is hineni. Say hineni. Hineni. That's good. Well done. Hineni. It's one word. It's a compound word. Two words smushed together. The first is hine, and it's not really hine. It's more like hine, like excitement. Like it's called an interjection. So it's a word with an exclamation point almost. Hine in the Hebrew language can actually function kind of itself as an exclamation point. So it's this idea of look, check this out, behold this thing, take a look at this. And then the suffix on it is ni, which means me or I. It's a first person. So it's not just here I am. So we can never add all of this into an English translation. Not even in a footnote, because it would take more than the text itself. The idea that's wrapped up in all of this, here I am, behold me, God, look at me. Hineni. So in this moment, Moses says, here I am, hineni. It's as if he's saying all at once, and just those three syllables. We can't quite express it that quickly in English. It's as if he's saying, God, in this moment, here I am. I'm looking at you, looking at me, and you know. I can't talk about hineni and hold it together, so this might take a few minutes. Moses is saying, God, you know. The good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. You know where I was in Egypt. You know what I did. You know that I ran away. You know how I ended up here. You know the disappointment. You know the humiliation, the shame, the embarrassment of going from the lap of luxury to wandering the wilderness with sheep. God, here I am. You know. There is something profound that happens when we can just come before God and stop hiding and stop running like Moses was doing, and instead surrender it all, give it all up, and just say, okay, God, here I am. Look at me, God, you know. A perfect God fights for imperfect people by making us his own. Cares for you. He loves you. He makes you his very own through his son, Jesus. He fights for imperfect people by making us his own. And it's like, this is kind of a silly example. If you have kids, you'll understand this. It's like a parent who cleans up their toddler's spill. Right? There's juice on the floor, but who's going to clean it up? A 2-year-old can't, use paper towels or a rag or whatever it is. So we make that mess our own, right? We clean it up. And it's one thing when there's juice on the floor. But what happens when life looks a little bit more like Moses? And there's brokenness deep in our soul. What happens when there is this deep sense of disappointment in our heart? Or maybe in your past you're really like Moses, and what happens when there's blood on your hands? Those are messes that we can't just clean up on our own. We can't clean that stuff up. But God makes our mess his own. And he sent Jesus to be in that with us, to restore us, and he is calling